Chapter 3. Beneath the Floor. The following morning, Mr. Huseevo was seated at his kitchen table, his small spectacles perched on the end of his nose, the aged fingers carefully smoothing a label onto a dark bottle of wine. It was a precise, absorbed task, one he performed with a quiet, concentrated intensity. When the label was affixed to his satisfaction, he rose and carried the bottle of wine to the rack, already laden with a dozen others, all identical in their dark, anonymous attire. He slotted it into place. The cat watched from its bed, golden eyes fixed on Huseevo, tracking his every move.
Later that afternoon, another knock. Huseevo, reading in his living room, glanced up, faint sigh escaping his lips from the interruption. He moved towards the window, then, slowly, to the front door. He removed his spectacles, tucking them into his breast pocket, as if shedding a layer of mild, scholarly distraction. This time it was Tracy, dressed in a muted council uniform, a sensible jacket and skirt, a folder clutched in her arms. Beside her stood Hannah, younger, similarly dressed, a badge pinned to her lapel.
Yes? Oh, hello, Mr. Hussey.
Tracy began, her voice faltering.
Huseevo,
he corrected, a faint mocking smile playing on his lips. He lifted a finger to his lips, a gesture that was both conspiratorial and subtly commanding. Tracy glanced down at her folder, as if the correct pronunciation might magically appear on the page.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You won't find the pronunciation in there, Huseevo said, his voice soft, almost amused. It's Hungarian. I'm Hungarian.
Yes, sorry. I know, oh, I'm sorry.
Tracy fumbled with her papers.
I had your notes here, but, oh.
A cascade of documents slipped from her grasp and scattered across the porch. Huseevo stooped, his movements surprisingly fluid, helping her gather the papers. His fingers brushed hers. They were surprisingly cold, despite the mild afternoon.
That really won't be necessary. Please come in.
The house, even in the muted light of dawn, held a faint smell that Tracy just took for old folk. It was a scent Huseevo had known for centuries, a familiar undercurrent beneath the beeswax and old wood. He moved through the kitchen, his bare feet silent on the worn vinyl, the floor cool against his soles, each step a quiet displacement of the still air. The morning light, still thin and bruised, laid strips across the floor, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stillness, suspended like tiny ephemeral spirits. He paused by the range where Eeshmeroosh lay coiled in her warm bed, a dark, glossy shadow with eyes like molten gold. The cat, as ever, was a still, impartial spectator, its purr a continuing subtle vibration. Huseevo's hand routinely poured milk into the chipped saucer. The rhythmic gurgle was a domestic counterpoint to the deeper, older background that only he and perhaps Eeshmeroosh could truly perceive. He set the saucer down, the ceramic chinking, softly rousing the cat to lift her head slowly.
Her eyes, the intelligence unsettling, a flicker of something old and knowing in their depths. She rose, stretched, moved closer to the bowl, and began to lap. The sound was soft, contented, a tiny compliment to Huseevo.
"This will keep you happy, my little Siska,"
he said, his voice a sound of curling, sibilant repetition. A whisper of old worlds, a language that had been spoken in this house for generations. His eyes, the color of peat, were fixed on the cat.
"Your leg is almost healed."
He watched the cat for a moment longer, a faint curve to his lips that held no warmth, only a deep, quiet satisfaction. The ritual of the milk, the quiet communion with Eeshmeroosh, was a small, comforting anchor in the vast, timeless ocean of his existence. It was a beginning, just as the night's work was an ending. The cycle continued as it always had, as it always would. The house itself held a peculiar stillness, a timelessness that defied the milk bottle on the counter, the faint broken sound of the radio program drifting from the living room. It was a space unmoored from any specific decade, breathing instead an old air. This was his sanctuary, a place where the threads of time frayed and became indistinct, where the past and present bled into one another, where the boundaries between the living and the slumbering were narrow. He turned from Eeshmeroosh, his eyes drifting to the window. The street outside was still and hushed, painted in the pale nascent light of dawn. A lone milk float, its electric monotone a distant whine, moved slowly down the road, a lone sentinel in the quiet morning. The milkman, a young lad with a shock of sandy hair, whistled a tuneless melody, his breath misting in the frosted air, a fleeting cloud against the grey sky. Huseevo watched him, a secret observer of the mundane rhythms of human life. A life so fleeting, so fragile. The boy would grow, would age, would wither, just as all of them did. But the house and the forces that waited beneath it would remain unchanging, eternal. The post-ritual quiet was a balm, a deep, eerie calm that settled over the building, holding it frozen in time. There was no frenzy, no lingering adrenaline, only a spiritual sense of completion. The air, though still carrying that faint, gentle frost, felt lighter, cleansed. The earth had drunk its fill, and the old hunger, for a time, was sated. A subtle shift in the house's underlying tone, a deeper, more resonant reverberation confirmed it. He moved towards the plain, unpainted door set flush with the wall beside the dresser. The wood was cold beneath his touch, unyielding, almost damp. He pushed it open, and the scent intensified, a rich, cloying aroma that spoke of iron and life and its abrupt cessation. The cellar exhaled its breath, damp and cold, drawing him deeper into its silent gloom. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with damp earth and something else, something dreadful. The old stone steps descended into absolute darkness, each one a familiar tread. He moved without hesitation, his feet finding the worn indentations in the stone. Steps worn smooth by centuries of mostly descent. The ceaseless, rhythmic sound of dripping was amplified here, surrounding him an echo of the life that had bled out into the earth. Each drip was the heartbeat of the cellar, the pulse of the old forces that flowed beneath his home, a relentless, quiet cadence. The air, heavy and still, pressed against his skin, cool and moist, carrying the pervasive, subtle taste of fresh blood. He reached the bottom, his eyes accustomed to the gloom, discerning the faint outlines of the stone floor, the rough-hewn walls that wept with dampness. The floor was slick in places, a dark green sheen reflecting the minimal light that filtered from the open doorway above. He knelt, his old bones creaking softly, a dry, protesting sound in the silence, and began the work. The clean-up was a ritual in itself, a necessary act of reverence and meticulousness. He worked slowly, his weathered hands moving with a practiced ease, each motion precise. The blood, rich and vicious, had pooled on the stone, seeping into the cracks, a dark offering to the sky. It clung to the rough texture of the flagstones, a dark, almost black stain against the grey, like spilled ink on old parchment. He used a thick, coarse cloth, its fibres absorbing the liquid with a soft sucking sound, wringing it into a waiting vessel. The vessel, a simple earthenware pot, was old, its surface smooth and cool beneath his touch, its dark glaze absorbing the essence of countless offerings, a quiet witness to generations of similar acts. He felt the subtle warmth of the blood on his fingers, a fleeting heat against the cool stone, a visceral connection to the life that had just departed. The work was physically demanding, the muscles in his back and shoulders protesting, but he moved with an unyielding purpose, his breath controlled and steady in the repetition. As he worked, faint wavering began at the edges of his vision, a distortion in the air like heat rising from hot tarmac or the wavering of an old imperfect mirror. The cellar walls seemed to waver, to thin, revealing glimpses of other times, other rituals. He saw his grandmother, her face a network of fine wrinkles, her eyes dark and knowing, her hair a silver braid down her back, performing the same task. Her hands, surprisingly strong for their age, moved with the same quiet reverence as his own, the same meticulous care. He saw her pouring the runoff into the earth, speaking words in a tongue he barely remembered, let alone understood. Sounds of gratitude and appeasement to the sleeping, contented earth. Flickering light of a single candle had cast long dancing shadows that seemed to writhe on the blood-licked stone, mirroring the unseen energies at play. Then the scene shifted, dissolving into another older memory. He saw his great-grandfather, a stern, unsmiling man with a beard like spun iron, his silhouette framed against the flickering light of a tallow lamp, his face streaked with sweat and grime. He was younger then, a boy at his great-grandfather's side, watching,
learning. The man's eyes, fixed on the same pool of blood, had been intense, completely focused, a profound understanding in his eyes. He remembered the weight of the ritual knife in his great-grandfather's hand, the way the light had caught its old, pitted blade, glinting dully in the gloom. The air had been heavy with the silence of his pinpoint concentration, broken only by the drip of the offering, each drop a reverberating echo in the confined space. He remembered a time, too, when the ritual had faltered. His great-uncle, a man of lesser conviction, had hesitated, his resolve wavering at the critical moment. The earth had recoiled, the resonance of the house had fallen silent, and a blight had settled upon the land for a season. A cold, barren emptiness that had withered crops and sickened livestock. The memory was a stark reminder of the consequence of doubt, of the absolute necessity of complete commitment. These were not mere memories, not simple recollections. They were echoes, vibrations, a generational memory passed down through the bloodline, a living current that flowed through him. He was not just cleaning up. He was participating, reconnecting with the unbroken chain of his ancestors, each one a link in the ritual's long, winding history. The faces of the past appearing and disappearing in the shadows, indistinct but present, their silent approval await in the cold air, icy fingers that seeped into his core, a chill that was both physical and temporal. He moved the body, its limbs stiff and rigid. It was a necessary part of the process, a final act of respect for the vessel that had served its purpose. He dragged it carefully across the stone, the faint scrape of cloth against rock echoing in the enclosed space, a sound that was absorbed by the damp walls. The earth, he knew, was drinking its fill, drawing the life force deep into its drunken core, a slow, powerful absorption. The ritual runoff, the essence of the offering, seeped into the soil, nourishing the old roots that stretched beneath the house, connecting it to something vast and unknowable, something that pulsed with a slow, deep, rhythmical, subtle heartbeat. Imagine the network of roots, a subterranean nervous system pulsing with the newly absorbed energy. The house itself a living, breathing entity, its foundations steeped in the old power, its brickwork oscillating with renewed vigor. He finished, the stone floor gleaming faintly in the dim light, but brighter now with the possession of the dawn that filtered from the open doorway above, a clean, dark sheen. The air, though still carrying the odor, felt cleaner, lighter, a subtle shift in its density, as if a great weight had been lifted. He stood, his back aching slightly, a dull throb in his lower spine, and ascended the steps. Each one a step back into the mundane world, leaving the old forces to their quiet digestion. He closed the door, a soft click echoing in the sudden silence, a finality that sealed off the sacred space, a barrier between the seen and the unseen. As he turned away, he thought he heard a faint shift from within the cellar, a settling, a deep, contented sigh from the earth itself, a sound that was both a whisper and a promise.